afternoon. Welcome to Author's Voice, a virtual book signing network. My name is Bjorn Skaptason, and I'm your host for today's show. And today's show is called Stranger Than Fiction. Although this book we're going to talk about today is probably about exactly as strange as fiction. It's a novel. It's a novel that we're going to talk about today, and it is a terrific novel. It's a historical novel, and I'm going to show it to you right now. We're going to talk about Girl in Disguise, a novel by Greer McAllister, sent to us by Source Books, 308 pages and $25.99. Now, let's get to our interview and meet our author. Our author today, Greer McAllister, is a native Midwesterner, a proud Midwesterner, I've noticed, and a poet, a short story writer, a playwright, and twice a novelist. And she has an MFA from American University. Her first novel, The Magician's Lie, was a USA Today bestseller and has been optioned by Jessica Chastain's Freckle Films company. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's very exciting.
Now, congratulations too, and most importantly, on A Girl in Disguise, a fabulous book.
Thanks.
When was it released? Just this week, right?
Just a couple of weeks ago. Hasn't been a month yet.
Hasn't even been. You've been on the road, haven't you?
Yep, on and off.
On and off.
Right now on.
Right now on. But you have arrived in our heroine's hometown.
Yes.
Or at least in her town of origin for the purposes of your story. This is a story about. You know what? Why don't you give us the elevator pitch? You give us the elevator pitch about Girl in Disguise.
I've done it once or twice. I'd be happy to. It's about Kate Warne, the first female Pinkerton detective, inspired by the life of the real Kate Warne, the woman who was hired by Alan Pinkerton in 1856 in Chicago, right here, after answering a newspaper ad. He put an ad in the paper for Pinkerton operatives. It didn't say that only men could apply because it didn't have to, except that she was a woman and she decided she would apply. So he hired her, and we have some facts about her, but the story has a lot of holes in it, so I wrote a novel to fill in all those holes.
That's and well done.
Thank you.
Well done. Yeah, what drew you to Kate, or how did you learn about Kate originally?
I don't even know where I heard her name first or where I saw her name first. It was on the vast internet, which you know is the source of all good and bad things in the modern world. But when I read her name, I read she's the first female Pinkerton detective. She was way ahead of her time. And I wondered why I hadn't heard her story. And the more I found out about her story, the more I wondered why I hadn't heard it before. She helped save Abraham Lincoln's life. She was not just the first female detective, but she was the head of a bureau of female detectives within the Pinkerton agency. She went undercover. She was a detective. She was a spy. She did a lot of really amazing things. And I thought somebody should probably write a book.
Now, we talked before we started, she came back to live with us here in Chicago. She's up there in Graceland Cemetery. Did you visit her today?
I did pay her a visit, yes, my first time. So it was good to have that opportunity while I'm here.
So that was the first time you'd visited? Great. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Now, Chicago, as you mentioned before, Chicago plays an important role in this story, especially the earlier part of the story, 1856 and all. How did you imagine Kate moving around in the city in those early chapters? What role does Chicago play in her early adventures?
It plays a very, very big role, and it is a bit of a challenge as a historical novelist because I can go to Chicago, but I can't go to 1856 Chicago. I can't go to 1861 Chicago and feel what it feels like. So for my purposes, I had to imagine and to draw in details. I feel like so much of fiction writing and what makes a good book is the selection of detail. I could have gone on for pages and pages and pages about the fact that they were using a hydraulic system to lift the city so that it could have sewers, which I think everybody benefits from in the long run. But I found that detail, I used that detail. So I was able to just gather some facts about the city. I was able to look at a map from the period and make sure I got the street names right. because there are always readers out there, bless their hearts, who will tell you if you got a street name wrong. And I had a little bit of help with that also because my publisher is a Naperville publisher, so they're more familiar with Chicago than the average group of people. And so my copy editor and my editor and everybody else who was involved were able to keep me very honest on Chicago history and Chicago now.
Well, one of the things about history, and yes, Chicago changes a lot. In fact, in 1871, it changed entirely.
A whole lot, yeah.
And you mentioned that. Let's take a little detour because you did mention what we don't know about Kate has a lot to do with the episode of October of 1871, doesn't it?
The post-1871 Pinkerton agency records are a lot better than the pre-1871 Pinkerton agency records. And I live in Washington, D.C., and I was lucky enough to get to visit the Library of Congress, where the Pinkerton agency's archives are kept. And I expected there to be this bonanza of information about Kate, and there is not. I was able to get through everything that the archives had about Kate in one day. But I did get a Library of Congress library card with my picture on it.
Oh,
so
good.
I was glad to have that experience. And I got to touch Timothy Webster's logbook. I got to really go through what had survived and what is still there in the records from that time.
For those at home in Yuma, Arizona, or Poughkeepsie, New York, or Perth, Australia, where we have regular viewers, we are talking about the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. We've been sort of working around. We're talking about the fire of 1871, which absolutely destroyed the city, wiped it clean, and then they built it up again with new street names, so that real Chicagoans can criticize you when you get the names wrong. Well, you pointed this before. Novels, and I recognize this from my point of view as a historian, a dealer. Novels need not concentrate on factual accuracy the way histories do. They don't have to, and I think historians recognize that. But what rules did you make for yourself regarding history when weaving historical stories in with those fictional stories that you made? What rules did you make for yourself?
It is tricky, and you do have to, each novelist has their own sort of lines, has their own sort of decisions that they make about what they're going to do. In my case, when there was a fact about Kate that was known, I didn't contradict it unless it was absolutely necessary for the story. So it is known that Kate was born in New York, but it is not known whether she lived in New York. She said she was a widow. I say she was a widow. My Kate, I'm very possessive, she's my Kate. My Kate was a widow. There are books about Kate Warne that say she might have been lying about being a widow. So in that case, I'm sticking as close to the facts as I can where there are facts. And then there are other characters in the book were people from real life. Abraham Lincoln is in the book. Alan Pinkerton is in the book. So I tried to respect those people and their histories, which are obviously much better documented than Kate's, and I tried not to make anybody really unpleasant unless there was historical proof that they were really unpleasant.
Yes.
Because in that case, you might as well stick to it. And I tried to just have everybody play the role that they needed to play in Kate's story, but it does remain Kate's story first and foremost.
Well, let's talk about one of those roles, because it's the role, you come into these walls at Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, one of the, even if he only waltzes onto the stage 2 or 3 times, what about Old Abe? Did he give you some challenges in trying to find a way to characterize this person that's been written over and over and over again?
Yeah, I mean, there's no new territory to be staked out with Abe, but I felt like it was important to have him not just appear the one time that he did, that we know for a fact he appeared in Kate's life, which is when she helped save his life during the Baltimore plot in 1861 on his way to his inauguration. So that was an absolutely documented instance where she was one of the Pinkerton agents who protected him on the train to get him through Baltimore without successfully being assassinated in 1861. So that, I felt like that wasn't enough. I did want to establish earlier on that they had had some contact because he worked as a lawyer for the same railroad that the Pinkertons did a lot of work for. So it would not have been implausible for them to meet doing that. And so for the purposes of the story, that's one of the ways that they meet here.
Well, the Baltimore plot plays a very important part in this book, but it's not the reason for the book. The reason for the book is Kate,
right,
and her career. But fill us in for the folks at home on a little more on that Baltimore plot, on the assassination plot, and in a fascinating way, how the historic Kate Warne and your Kate both played a very important role in saving his life.
Right, right. And there's a fantastic nonfiction book for those who are interested in the full detail of the Baltimore plot. The Hour of Peril by Daniel Stashower that came out in 2014 is a great, meticulously researched, absolutely factual account of what happened. I incorporated it in my novel, but didn't use exactly the same players because you can't really, I didn't want to introduce 16 new characters just for the purpose of this. So Alan Pinkerton was there, Kate was there, Timothy Webster was there, Hattie Lawton was there. So these are all Pinkerton agents who helped play this role. So because the Pinkertons had their ear to the ground trying to detect and prevent sabotage by Southern sympathizers of the railroads, they were among the first to hear that there was a plot to assassinate Lincoln in 1861 because it involved the railroad. The way that Baltimore's tracks were set up at the time, you couldn't just ride through the night on a train. You had to get off of one train and get onto another, or literally they would hitch the cars to horses and have the train drawn across the city in that way instead of on the tracks. So a very interesting mode of transportation, but one that created the opportunity for sabotage and for Abraham Lincoln, if he had gotten off that train when he was scheduled to, it would have been an opportunity for him to be surrounded, and I believe they were going to stab him. They had several assassins in line waiting to do that. So because the Pinkertons heard about it, they were able to find out enough information to establish that it really was a plot that Lincoln needed to be concerned about, and he agreed quite reluctantly, as my understanding, to go through Baltimore the night before he was scheduled to go through. He did not want to disappoint the people that he had told could come see him in Baltimore, but he also wanted to make it to his inauguration alive, and I think we're all pretty glad that he chose that. But he was disguised as an invalid. They made him take off the trademark hat. They, I believe, asked him to shave his beard, and he said no. Because he was being inaugurated the next day, and he wanted to look like him and to claim that space. And who wouldn't, being president? So he did reluctantly agree to be snuck through the night before, and the role that Kate played was to pretend to be his sister and to accompany him and ride the train with him, and to stay up all night just in case, all the way to DC. So some people say that the Pinkerton agency motto, "We never sleep," was in honor of Kate. But as a historian, you know that people say a lot of things, and that may or may not have any anchor in the truth.
Right. Now we have a question came in from the internet, and it's from Bob in Edwardsville, Illinois. Thank you very much, Bob. And you've talked a little bit about this, but I'm gonna go ahead and read Bob's question for us. As an historical novelist, you are akin to Steven Spielberg.
Oh, I'll take that comparison.
Sure. Whose movie on Lincoln was touted as rife with authentic detail. Yet when he was pressed on the number of historical anomalies in his film, Spielberg said, "I'm a filmmaker, not a historian." What is your feeling about historical fact meeting with fiction?
I should know which is which. That's my position. So I don't think that there should be anomalies because I screwed something up or because I just didn't care, because I do care. So in the cases in my book where I've changed historical fact for the purposes of the story, I have said so in the author's note. There are a couple of tweaks that I've made. I've certainly made composite characters instead of using the actual co-workers that she would have had at the time, for a number of reasons. And so whenever I'm departing from that, I do make sure that people know, okay, this is why I did that for Kate's story. And I'm not a historian. I don't have the particular skills that it takes to stick to the facts. But I do feel like I owe some debt to history and to the readers to say, okay, this is the part that's real and this is the part that was created.
Bob did give us a follow-up question. You've also addressed this to some extent. Did Kate write about meeting Lincoln afterwards? Kate's a little bit of a cipher, isn't she?
Yeah, if she did write about it, none of that survived because we don't have any Kate letters, we don't have any Kate diaries, so Kate's voice has gone unheard. So I got to create a voice for her and I got to create a personality for her and basically came up with the personality that I think she must have had in order to do the things that she did.
Mm-hmm. That brings me to my next question. I love the fact that Kate narrates the story. It's as if it's a memoir.
Yeah.
This is Kate's memoir of her story. Was that a point of view you chose at the beginning of the project, or did that evolve as you began getting to know Kate?
I definitely wanted it to be her story and it to be her voice from the very beginning. Pinning down that voice took me a little while. I'd say it took me 6 months to write the first 20 pages. It took me a long time to get that voice right and to choose the moment and to choose how she began her own story. Because I wanted to start it with her getting hired, but it also is interesting to sort of just drop you into the middle of the action where she's already on a case. And so I've cheated and kind of done both of those things in the early pages, but I felt like it was Kate's story, and I wanted her to tell it herself.
Well, one of the things I think we learned about Kate from the way you introduce her is that she begins this story on an adventure. I mean, she just dives right in, and that says a lot about the character that you're creating for her.
Yeah, I think where it starts is she's on a case and she has to try to get some information out of a criminal who is believed to have robbed a bank. But on that first page, she's pretending to be someone else. She's surrounded by men. She's scared, but she's not showing it, and she's just going to forge ahead and do what she needs to do. And that is pretty much Kate. So I think it worked well as an introduction.
Mm-hmm. Now, Kate has you gave her a little bit of a backstory, and do you feel like that backstory makes her unusual for a woman of her time?
Certainly, and I think she had to be unusual for a woman of her time to even think of going into Alan Pinkerton's office and doing what she did and asking for a job. But I think that the background that I've created for her sort of gives a reason why she has the skills that she has, because she did have to pretend to be a Southerner in such a convincing way that other people from the South, from that particular area of the South that she was pretending to be from, couldn't detect it. So I felt like she had to have had some family background or experience, at least, that made her a very good mimic and that gave her an ear for accents and that sort of stage play sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, we've had a lot of different authors on these programs, and of course we've had authors that come to writing fiction from all sorts of different perspectives. Now you're trained to writing. You went ahead and you dove in. You got that MFA. And do you feel like your perspective as having been trained to writing fiction gives you a particular form that you like to approach, or do you still approach your writing as though you were an amateur wanting to tell a great story?
I approach it very sloppily, to tell you the truth. My first drafts are always a mess, and I learn where the story is by having written it and then deleting the parts that don't work and adding more parts that do work, hopefully in a forward direction all the time. So I learned a huge amount from my MFA program and from having my material workshopped and from taking courses about great literature and great writers. I learned a lot of things that way, but in terms of giving me a structure to follow and teaching me to structure a novel, that's been sort of on-the-job learning since I started writing novels.
Now, the hero of this book, Kate, and the hero of your first book are both, correct me if I'm wrong, but very, very strong female characters, very strong women. And I think of them, especially Kate, I think of a strong and insurgent woman. Here's a woman who is making inroads into men's spheres of influence. Is this a character is this a characteristic that draws you, or is this a good character that you like to tell stories about?
Yeah, I think certainly there are lots of reasons to write about strong women. Obviously, I'm writing about this one in particular because she hasn't been written about enough. And also it's boring to read about people who just sort of sit around and think about things usually. So somebody who's going to have adventures, somebody who's going to be a pioneer. And Kate is not necessarily going into Pinkerton's office and forging a path as the first female detective, hoping that other women will follow in her footsteps. I don't think she, and I didn't know the real Kate, obviously, but I think she was mostly concerned with doing it herself and not trying to be a pioneer, not trying to break barriers for the sake of breaking barriers. But that is what she did.
Mm-hmm. She blazed her own trail, and then if someone wanted to follow it, well, that was someone like your historical character, Hattie. She can follow that trail.
Yep.
Now you've been, as we said before, you've been touring this book around, but there are other ways to get people excited about a book. And one of them, I like, this is a credit to Source Books. Source Books, which some publishers are doing now, gives us a reading group guide as part of this book. And I think that's a wonderful idea. How important, in your experience, are reading groups and book clubs to you connecting with your fans?
Very, very valuable, very helpful. I mean, I'm in a book club. Usually I'm without one right now, and it makes me sad because book clubs are such a wonderful way to engage with books, because reading is, at heart, like writing, a solitary pursuit. But if you can discuss and you can gather, you can learn a lot more about what you've read, and you learn more about other people as well. So I'm a huge fan of book clubs, and I'm able to visit them through the power of the internet on Skype. And so it's very easy for people to just request through my website that I come and pay them a visit. And I tell them always I bring my own wine. So if they have a book club that drinks their wine on their side of the camera, I have my wine on my side of the camera, and we all spend a very pleasant hour together.
It's a great way to make contact. And yeah, you anticipated my next question. Of course, we think of book clubs as being everybody gathering together. And here in Chicago, wonderful ways that people do book clubs, obviously, in bars. Yeah, get together in your favorite bar and have a discussion there. But here we are in my favorite bar, the internet, having a chance to connect people with people on the internet. And this allows us to meet more people. Do you see any downside for that? Or is it just another way to project these stories out?
I think the only downside of using the internet to connect with readers is that sometimes it's more fun than working. So it's work, but it's work in a very different way, because I'm engaged with readers through Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Litzy and other social networks, and that I think is a wonderful thing for readers. It's certainly, for me as a writer, really inspiring and really exciting. But I can sort of go down a rabbit hole on Twitter for an hour and then say, oh, wait, I was supposed to be writing. I should really get back to that.
True. Yeah, exactly. I should be selling books, but instead. We'll get back to Kate one more time here before we wrap up our show. One of the wonderful things about Kate being a spy, an agent, an adventurer, is that there may or may not be pictures of her.
Right.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your book, and I went out on the internet trying to find a picture of her, and the best one I could find was just this little line drawing, and it itself, by showing that, was even more romantic or adventuresome. Oh, there she is. She's over there on our.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And to me, that made her seem a little more exciting. The fact that we can't see her, we don't know whether we're seeing her. Is she hiding just off screen?
I think she is. There are a couple of pictures in the photo images in the Library of Congress that are identified as her, but again, in history, we know whoever writes something down makes it the truth. And both of the pictures in the Library of Congress that claim to be of Kate are of someone in a Union soldier's uniform who happens to be standing in close proximity to Alan Pinkerton. So somebody might have been taking a guess, or that might really be her. But she does continue to maintain her air of mystery even now.
And this novel, A Girl in Disguise, is a great way to meet this international woman of mystery. Now,